When we have nothing left to give, there'll be no reason for us to live. When we have nothing left to lose, you will have nothing left to use. We ain't nothing. You have no control. We ain't nothing. You have no control. Well, another really, really subtle message embedded in that song from Fugazi from 1991. In this lecture, I want to talk about Facebook privacy and sharing culture. So I'm going to do two videos. This first video is going to be quite straightforward to lay the groundwork really for the second video, where I'm going to talk in some depth about the concept of the data subject and what Facebook creates out of us as users. So this is a very Foucauldian idea, the notion that different bureaucracies in society create different types of subject. And in the context of Facebook, what I want to argue is that Facebook as an enterprise creates what is known as data subject. It's not just Facebook, it's other companies too, but I think Facebook is the most prevalent example of them. Now, I find Facebook really interesting at the moment because it seems to be a huge generational thing going on with Facebook, where practices of use for Gen Zers like yourselves seem to be very, very different than practices of use for somebody like me who's a Gen Xer. But in truth, I are the user anyway, and very different in terms of usage of people older than me as well. So you can get generational changes in that, and maybe we'll get into that in the seminar and so on. But anyway, just as an overview of what I want to do for the two lectures here, obviously talk about who are Facebook, size and complexity of the world's biggest social network. I think it's a good idea if you've watched the film The Social Network. It's not necessary really, but it's an interesting thing about the origin of Facebook. Remember, it's a film, and so it's not entirely historically accurate, but it's got actually a fairly good scope of how Facebook was created and what the processes were, and a lot of the ambivalence towards employees and so on the part of Mark Zuckerberg. I want to introduce the concept of digital oil, which I think is very, very important. Something I talk about in my book, Re-emergence of Virtual Reality, a lot in chapter 3 of that book. So if you want a quick overview of it, by all means, I'm happy to send you a copy of that. But it's also a very, very important concept in terms of nailing Facebook's business model. Facebook as a surveillance platform and the idea that there's no such thing as a free lunch, that'll come in the second video. So, just to kick off. Facebook, a Facebook minute. This is actually taken from 2018, right? I could have updated it, but actually when I looked at like the 2020 ones, which kind of surprised me in the context of COVID-19 and everyone being under lockdown, there wasn't a huge amount of changes. You just look at some of these things and they're kind of crazy. Every minute on Facebook, you get 500 new accounts. And I think, okay, is that a lot? Well, there are 60 minutes in an hour. Right, so you do a quick bit of mathematics. Who's going to beat me to this? It's 30,000 in an hour. 30,000 new accounts. So you get 24 hours in a day. Oh wow! Now you're talking about a lot of people adding every day, and on an annual rate, that's huge. Yeah? They make $11,000 a minute. Facebook as a company. There's bonkers money, people. That's huge money. That's crazy money. $600,000 an hour that they're making. So on a daily basis, they're making, in excess of what, $12 million a day, 365 days in a year. It's a huge company. 3 million items shared on Facebook every minute. 13,000 apps installed on Facebook. 100,000 friend requests. 150,000 messages sent. Big part of the business is the messages. 416 compromised logins, 416 hacks a minute. Shows that security is perhaps not the greatest. 3 million likes. Like and share buttons are viewed 15 million times every minute on other sites. 323 days of YouTube videos are viewed on Facebook. It's really, really interesting. The content of Facebook comes from other platforms very often. So one of the most popular ways of watching YouTube is on Facebook. 50,000 links shared, 243,000 pictures shared. That's actually more than you get in a minute on Instagram. And I know Instagram is the same company, and we'll get into that, but
these are crazy, crazy numbers. Facebook is still hugely popular. I think there is a generational thing going on with Facebook, but it is still massively popular. This is taken from 2017, and again, there wasn't a radical difference in any of this. And the 2020 stats really didn't pick up something interesting for me for TikTok, so it's like I'm using these because they weren't hugely changed. People who use these use apps in the US several times a day. Facebook still is number one. WhatsApp, Facebook is number two. Instagram is there in 5th place, and that's a Facebook app too. So you see the dominance of the company. Interesting thing here, of course, is that Tumblr is not a thing anymore in those kind of numbers. It is a thing, but it's not a thing like it was a thing, if that makes sense. Facebook owns WhatsApp, Instagram, and Friend Feed. Friend Feed is the one that people don't know about. Friend Feed is really, really important because it is the way that Facebook built the interface that we're so familiar with. But the two that we probably best known, or the ones we're aware of, is WhatsApp and Instagram. And what's interesting here is when you boil this down to what they paid for. So if you look at WhatsApp, for example, purchased for $19 billion. I've done this just after WhatsApp was purchased by them, and they paid basically a rate of $42 per user. So really the purchase is on, we value the user at this amount. WhatsApp's like, damn, $19 billion, yes, we will take some of that sweet Facebook money. So Facebook's calculation here is that those $42 they pay for each user on WhatsApp will work out better for them in terms of their revenue and income. That's how they go about doing things as a business. So earlier on in this product cycle, you get Insta, $33 per user. Still purchase a billion people, but there were far fewer people using Instagram at that point in time. There's only 30 million active users when they purchased it in 2012. Far higher numbers now. That $33 per user has turned out to be a real bargain for Facebook. They have leveraged way more money out of that purchase of Instagram than they could have ever hoped for, I suspect. Instagram's become crazy popular in the time that Facebook has owned it, and they have been able to leverage big bucks out of this. So Facebook remains the most popular social networking site globally. Now, when we boil down what does that mean, social networking sites, web-based platforms that integrate different media, information and communication technologies that allow at least the generation of profiles, yes, Facebook does that, that display information describing the users, yes, display of connections, yes, the establishment of connections between users displayed on the connection list, yes, and communication between users, yes, so it has all these things. What I'd say from this 2009 definition is also just a key thing here in the first line. Social networking sites are now not just web-based. So when Facebook emerges in, 2007, I guess, as a major platform, most social networking is still web-based. That is, you needed a web browser to access Facebook. You don't need that anymore. We don't typically use web browsers for this function anymore. We have apps on phones instead. In terms of the foundation, and there is a creepy looking dude. Oh man. Mark Zuckerberg, Eduardo Saverin, Dustin Moskovitz, Chris Hughes, who were all in Harvard University at the time, founded Facebook in 2004. Initially limited the website to Harvard students. Facebook grew out of a previous iteration of a website by Zuckerberg, which was basically a variation on Hot or Not for female students on campus. Yeah, he's not a creepy guy. Facebook gradually added support to students at various other universities and eventually to high schools, and eventually opened up in 2006 to anyone. It was no longer based on educational establishments. So since 2006, anyone who's at least 13 years old has been allowed to become a registered user of Facebook. There are variations across that globally, but typically it's about 13 years old. Be interesting for you guys to think, did I have an account before I was 13, and why? In terms of being a business, Facebook held its initial public offering, which is floated on the stock exchange, in February 2012, valuing the company at $104 billion in 2012, the largest valuation to that date for a newly listed public company, the biggest IPO in history. Began selling stock to the public 3 months after that IPO based on that valuation. Facebook makes most of its revenue from advertisements that appear on screen. This is the danger of Facebook as it's set out. So here's the great man himself, Tim Berners-Lee. If you don't know much about Tim Berners-Lee, he's a fascinating character. He's a British guy. People get confused sometimes. Have you heard Tim Berners-Lee? He's like, he invented the internet. No, he didn't. What he did was he combined a series of pre-existing protocols together to create something called the World Wide Web, which was a way of utilizing the internet, which already existed, as a way for sharing text, graphic, videos, sound, etc. in the form of web pages. So the internet as we understand it today really was kind of devised by this guy. So he's a very important guy. Now, Tim Berners-Lee claims that the web itself is under threat from misinformation, questionable practices of political advertising, a loss of control over personal information, and the weaponization of the web by companies like Facebook. What Tim Berners-Lee is claiming is that these companies have monopoly power online, and they utilize that monopoly power to manipulate users to use their services more so they can leverage more money, right? So how is this done? Misinformation, questionable political processes, lack of control over our personal data. They take ownership of that data. And Berners-Lee, his vision of what the web should be when he invented it in 1992, I remember he released the World Wide Web and its protocols for free. He wasn't interested in profit. I mean, he could have made a fortune, right? He sees companies like Facebook as a real danger of this because they have weaponized the web for their own personal gain as companies, and in doing so they have created an environment online which is full of danger for the user. So by weaponization, Berners-Lee is referring to the use of data harvested and analyzed by Facebook and others and then deployed as tools for political gain, such as the Facebook data breach used by Cambridge Analytica to target and manipulate Facebook users in both the 2016 American presidential election and the 2016 Brexit referendum in the United Kingdom, where Facebook users were specifically targeted with highly dubious and misleading advertising in the run-up to both of those elections in order to persuade people to vote a particular way, either for Trump or for Brexit. So both campaigns on that side of each campaign invested heavily in this kind of data management software from Cambridge Analytica and a very, very sort of hypersensitive, hyper-granulated targeting system for individual voters. If you want to find out more about this, I do recommend the Netflix film The Great Hack. Very, very good for this. So, what was the story here? The algorithms that work on the Facebook platform trawl through interactions and activities of users on the platform to gather sensitive personal information about sexual orientation, race, gender, intelligence, and even childhood trauma, mining and refining what is known as the digital oil of the digital economy. Digital oil is data. Facebook as a business churns through all the data that goes through it as a system to produce a more refined, this is why the term oil is used, right? You might be familiar with the term oil refining. Well, Facebook refines us as highly polished and well understood individuals to be sold at the right price to advertisers. And this is indeed what happened with Cambridge Analytica, right? Cambridge Analytica hijacked basically the Facebook algorithms and found people it knew could be susceptible to explicit persuasion on these electoral issues with the right kind of targeting. So you could have, for example, in the Brexit election, the Brexit referendum, I should say, you identify a group of people who are ambivalent towards the issue of Brexit itself, but are very, very interested in animal rights. So you produce then a set of adverts which question the legitimacy of the European Union in terms of its animal rights standing, and argues that Britain would be better off in terms of animal rights outside of the European Union. You target these people directly. Now, you might be only picking up a few hundred people, but in an election that's very close, a few hundred people can make a big difference. And if you've got thousands of different issues over and over that you can identify very, very cleverly and send out information very specifically to these people, Your hundreds of people become thousands, become tens of thousands, become hundreds of thousands, could even be in the millions. And this is the method that is used. So these results can be used to target users with tailored information to play on the psychological and personal profile that has been created of those people in order to attempt to persuade users to take particular courses of action. So Carol Cadwell and Emma Graham Harrison wrote about this in 2018, and it's in the reading list for this week. So at root then, what is Berners-Lee's criticism here? Berners-Lee's concerns are around the polarization of the web, as we call it, and the dominance of a few companies in a medium that was designed for everyone. So, as Jaron Lanier argues, the digital world has become a remarkably consolidated world. While the World Wide Web was portrayed as a great wilderness of different companies and different things on and then, like the Wild West of communication, dominance of these particular set of companies, with Facebook at the forefront of this dominance, has afforded them the opportunity to become vast data aggregators with the potential to disrupt and be disrupted in the context of wider society. So really, the shock of Trump winning in 2016 or the Brexit result in 2016, numerous other elections globally, shows the disruptive potential of Facebook as a medium in the democratic process. You know, you can manipulate people on a vast scale without their knowledge. You know, these aren't political ads necessarily. This is misinformation often being given to you, dressed up as other things, and you can be targeted directly with this stuff. So without monopolistic positions in search and data organization, social networking, or operating systems for Macs, there would not exist the kind of affordances. What I mean by affordances here is the kind of opportunities for the kinds of control and polarization that cause these concerns. So it is the size of the companies themselves which is hugely problematic. On Facebook, there is no one bigger. So the web and networked activity is dominated by a few companies. What I mean is Facebook in terms of social media, there's no one bigger. There is the great Jaron Lanier playing, I don't know what he's playing, but he seems to be having fun, right? Lanier argues that the information economy that we're currently building and we live within does not embrace capitalism as an economic system of participation, where we are selling our labor in order to be paid, you know, and we're contributing towards companies and so on in that way, but rather it's a new form of feudalism, where users are farmed for data and their interactions with one another become the foundation of a new data economy, which they play no part in. We are simply there as fodder to be used by these companies. So this kind of feudalism, data feudalism, is the product of all of us using these platforms all the time. We are contributing information all the time. That information is being constantly processed and refined to be sold to the highest bidder. It's crazy times. This idea isn't actually new. So the idea of the audience as a commodity really dates back to 1976 and Dallas Smythe. So companies like Facebook really organize data from users for the benefit of clients, their advertising partners, who want to manipulate what is presented to these people over these networks. Lanier was talking about this 6 years ago. Many of us have been talking about this for more than a decade. We knew what the model of these companies were. Didn't do anything to stop people taking up with these companies. So the result of this is that the process of capital accumulation itself in corporate digital media platforms is targeted advertising dictated by user activity. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward, you know. Corporate digital media platforms, targeted advertising dictated by our activities. That is social media. And the role of the media in the past has been to control and harness that audience power to produce a commodity that can be produced, sold, and consumed. Now, Dallas Smythe was talking specifically about television and newspapers here. You know, what is the business model of a newspaper? You might remember I talked about this in the context of 20th century newspapers last year in Introduction to Media History. The key thing about 20th century newspapers was they produced an audience to be sold to advertisers. So newspapers were sold, you know, the price of buying a newspaper, for even if you had millions of readers, wouldn't cover the production cost. But where they were making money is on the advertising that was placed in there. They would go to companies and say, this is how many readers we have, this is what those readers are like, this is the stuff they enjoy reading. You can advertise directly to these people, and people go, yeah! That is what we call the audience commodity, is producing a commodity to be sold. So the newspaper is producing an audience to be sold as a product. Facebook does this in a hyper granular and hyper-specific manner. It produces billions of audiences to be sold all the time, algorithmically, straight away. So advertisers, in effect, what they're doing is buying attention as a product from platforms committed to the monopolization of that attention. This is from Tim Wu's The Attention Merchants. And really what Wu is arguing here is that what advertisers are trying to do, and the best illustration of this I can think of is on the Instagram feed, right? You scroll, advert, you scroll, advert. Those advertisers are paying for a little second of your attention, and if it gets a hook, it's paid off. This is fantastic. The difference really between what Dallas Smythe was writing about in 1976 and what Tim Wu is writing about in 2017 and what we live in is that attention can be much more closely monitored today and controlled today on these platforms too. It's a hugely important difference. So in terms of Facebook and what we can think of as an audience on Facebook, the platforms of digital media allow for the storage and analysis of all interactions on those platforms. Every search, every like, every message, every click-through can be saved and added to the churn of data that is continually going on. And it goes even more granular than that. You know, when you're on Instagram and you stop and look at something, it's measuring that. You know, it's measuring how long you spent on that image. So it's measuring literally your attention span for particular images. Putting that into your profile, so they like this kind of thing. We'll give them more of that. How can we sell that? Must be a way of selling that on. So every message, every click-through can be saved and added to the churn of data harvesting on the data subject. That's a very important term, the data subject, created by the systems that view users through the lens of user interaction. These systems are creating what we call data subjects. So in terms of dominance then, online advertising has been seen as a mechanism by which Facebook exploits users and users become a commodity. Web 2.0 in general has been seen as based on the exploitation of free labor, but the conditions of use of these platforms, most users become part of a creative, precarious underclass of laborers whose work is dictated by and for the benefit of the platform we use. Indeed, we don't even get paid for it. We're doing the work for these things. The dominance of Facebook is remarkable in that we do work for that platform and we don't get paid a penny. I mean, we get a free Facebook account. It doesn't seem like a great deal to me, but what do I know? The oil of the digital economy, therefore, is your data. The digital oil is your data. And Facebook is up there with Google as being one of the most successful companies in the world because it has a highly refined set of procedures for harvesting and, I would say, processing data from users. This company is data rich, and therefore it's cash rich too. Zuckerberg, loads of data, loads of spucks. And therefore, what does Facebook do? It creates what I call data subjects. Data subject is an object or person that a set of data refers to. Facebook creates data subjects as soon as they start to join sites or Instagram or WhatsApp, and the continual production, processing, and sale of data from data subjects involves tracking their every use of Facebook and other websites too. Facebook's tentacles go all across the web, go all across different apps. They're out there harvesting everything. Second video, I'll get more into this idea of the data subject. I do apologize for the spin cycle going on in my washing machine at the moment. Catch you in a bit.